The vibration of my phone was practically drilling a hole through the marble table of the airport lounge. 110 missed calls. In my previous life, that number would have sent me into immediate crisis mode. I would have been on the phone, solving problems, smoothing over egos, fixing the unfixable. But today, I just watched it dance across the surface while I took another sip of my double espresso. The text message from my sister, Alexis, was still glowing on the screen. No place for you, it read. Tight with venue. Sorry. She thought she was cutting a guest from the head count to make room for a VIP. She didn't realize she was terminating the essential personnel required for the event's legal operation. I fingered the edge of my boarding pass. Hawaii. Unwe. The wedding back in Napa wasn't just going to be awkward. Without me standing on that property, it was officially, legally, over. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The text message arrived at 11:42 in the morning on a Tuesday. I remember the exact timestamp because I was in the middle of approving a $50,000 linen order for a tech gala in San Francisco. My phone lit up on my desk and there it was. A casual eviction from the biggest project of my personal life. I didn't cry. I didn't call our mother to ask if there had been some terrible misunderstanding. I didn't text back a string of question marks. In my line of work, emotion is just bad data. Clouds your judgment and slows down the supply chain. Instead, I stared at the words on the screen and processed them like a breach of contract. Tight with venue. That was the excuse. It was laughable. I knew exactly what the venue capacity was because I was the one who negotiated the contract. I knew the square footage of the reception hall down to the inch. I knew the fire marshal's limit. There was plenty of room. This wasn't a logistical issue. It was a personnel decision. They were firing me. I sat back in my ergonomic office chair and took a mental inventory. For 6 months, I had been the silent investor in the startup called Alexis's Dream Wedding. I had leveraged my professional reputation to secure the vineyard estate for free as a portfolio showcase, a savings of $45,000. I had called in favors with the top caterer in Napa to get a menu that usually costs $300 a head. I had spent my weekends, my evenings, and my sanity building a luxury experience on a budget that wouldn't cover a backyard barbecue. And now, my services were no longer required. My investment had yielded zero return. I looked at my calendar. The dates for the wedding were blocked out in red. Non-negotiable time off. But in the logistics world, a cancelled event isn't a tragedy. It's freed up inventory. I had 3 days of pure, unallocated time. I opened a new tab on my browser. The Global Hospitality Summit was happening in Maui on those exact dates. It is the Super Bowl of my industry. The biggest hotel chains, the most exclusive venue owners, the elite of the elite would all be there. I had originally declined the invitation because I was too busy playing the role of the good sister. I was too busy worrying about centerpieces and seating charts for people who didn't even want me in the room. But a good sister doesn't get uninvited via text message. A smart executive, however, pivots. I logged into my airline app. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess the cost. I selected the flight to Maui. First class. Non-refundable. I paid for it with a bonus I had earned from my actual job. The one where people respected my time and paid for my expertise. Click. Book. Confirmed. It wasn't a vacation. It was a reallocation of assets. They wanted space. I would give them 4,000 miles of it. I closed my laptop, took a deep breath, and went back to approving the linen order. I had a career to build, and for the first time in my life, I realized that my family was just dead weight on my balance sheet. To the untrained eye, the vineyard estate was just a postcard-perfect setting for a wedding. Rolling hills, golden light, vines stretching out to the horizon. But I didn't see the scenery. I saw the infrastructure. I saw the zoning laws, the fire codes, and the mountain of liability paperwork that underpinned every single glass of champagne. That venue was one of the most exclusive properties in Napa Valley. They didn't do favors. They didn't give discounts. The rental fee for a Saturday in peak season was $45,000. My parents couldn't afford the deposit, let alone the full fee. Alexis didn't have the credit score to sign the lease. So I fixed it. I did what I always did. I called in a decade's worth of professional favors. I pitched the wedding to the owners as a high-visibility portfolio event that would feature in industry magazines. I staked my own professional reputation on it. They waived the entire rental fee, but there was one non-negotiable condition. I had to be the site director on record. That meant every health permit, every catering license, and most importantly the liquor liability insurance, was issued in my name. I wasn't just the maid of honor. I was the legal entity standing between a party and a felony. If a guest slipped on a grape, I was getting sued. If the health inspector walked in and found the temperatures off by 2 degrees, my license was getting suspended. For months, I told myself I was doing this because I was a good sister. I told myself that being capable was my love language. But looking at that boarding pass, I finally recognized the truth. It wasn't love. It was conditioning. There is a psychological concept called the invisible chain of the survivor. It is the subtle, insidious training you receive when you grow up in a house where affection is a transaction. You learn early on that your value isn't inherent. It is calculated based on your utility. You don't get loved for being you. You get tolerated for being useful. I had spent 29 years forging that chain, link by link, burden by burden. I thought if I just carried enough weight, if I solved enough crises, if I made myself indispensable, they would finally have to keep me. I was wrong. Usefulness doesn't buy loyalty. Just buys you more work. They didn't see me as a person to be cherished. They saw me as infrastructure. I was the plumbing, the electricity, the foundation. Necessary, yes, but you don't invite the foundation to the party. You walk all over it. But here is the thing about infrastructure. When you remove it, the whole structure collapses. I looked at the fine print on the digital copy of the venue contract stored on my phone. Clause 14, Section B. The designated site director must be physically present on the premises at all times during the service of food and alcohol. Absence of the site director constitutes an immediate breach of contract and requires the cessation of all operations. It was black and white. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the law. By uninviting me, Alexis hadn't just hurt my feelings. She had unknowingly fired the only person who could legally turn on the lights. She wanted a wedding without me. Fine. She was about to find out exactly what a wedding without me looked like. It looked like an empty field with a locked gate. My father didn't call to ask how I was doing. He didn't call to mediate or to tell Alexis she was being unreasonable. In the Bennett family business model, David was the chief financial officer of Guilt Trips, and he was calling to collect a past due invoice. I answered on the third ring, putting him on speaker while I packed my suitcase. His voice filled the quiet apartment, booming with that false joviality he used right before he asked for money. He skipped the pleasantries. He went straight for the wallet. "Ren," he said, "your mother and I were looking at the honeymoon packages for Alexis. You know she wanted that overwater bungalow in Bora Bora. Ideally, we'd like to upgrade them. It's a once-in-a-lifetime trip." I stopped folding a silk blouse. "That sounds expensive," I said, my voice flat. "It is," he agreed, missing the ice in my tone entirely. "But since you're not buying a bridesmaid dress anymore, and you're saving all that money on travel and a hotel for the wedding, we figured you could cover the difference. It's $4,500. Call it a gesture of goodwill. To show your sister there are no hard feelings." I stared at the phone. The audacity was breathtaking. I had been fired from the event, stripped of my role, erased from the guest list. And now I was being asked to subsidize the vacation. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me to pay for the privilege of my own exclusion. It was a tax on my existence. "I don't have $4,500 for a vacation I'm not taking," I said. "Don't lie to me, Ren," he snapped, the joviality evaporating instantly. "We know what you make. We know what that contract with the tech summit paid. Stop being selfish. You're punishing your sister because you're jealous." Hung up. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just pressed the red button. But the silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. For a moment I almost felt guilty. That was the programming kicking in, the decades of training that told me my money wasn't really mine. It was a family resource I was merely stewarding. But then my phone pinged again. Not a text from Dad. A screenshot from Marco, a friend of mine who managed the catering staff for the venue. He had added a caption, "Thought you should see this. I'm so sorry." I opened the image. It was a group chat for the wedding VIPs, the groom's wealthy family, the investors, the people who mattered. Someone had asked, "Is Ren coming?" I wanted to talk to her about that convention in Seattle. And there was Alexis's reply. Black text on a white background. Indelible proof. Sadly no. We had to make the hard choice to uninvite her. Was struggling right now. Relapsed again. We just can't have that kind of liability around the open bar. We're hoping this is the wake-up call she needs to go back to rehab. The air left the room. I have never touched drugs. I drink a glass of wine with dinner. My entire career is built on trust, precision, and sobriety. I manage million-dollar budgets and high-risk events. If a rumor like that got out in my industry that I was a liability, that I was unstable, that I was an addict, I wouldn't just lose a contract. I would become uninsurable. Alexis hadn't just hurt my feelings. She had launched a targeted strike on my livelihood. She was willing to destroy my professional reputation to cover up her own pettiness. She needed a reason for my absence that made her look like the victim and me look like the disaster, so she invented one that could bankrupt me. The last trace of sadness evaporated from my chest. It was replaced by a cold, metallic clarity. This wasn't a family squabble anymore. It was defamation. It was an act of war. And in war, you don't send wedding gifts. You cut off the supply lines. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. It was time to conduct an audit. Sarah's office was a sanctuary of mahogany and silence, the kind of room designed to handle high-stakes corporate mergers, not family feuds. But as I laid the binder on her desk, the weight of it felt just as heavy as any acquisition deal. We weren't planning a wedding anymore. We were conducting a forensic audit of a disaster. Sarah adjusted her glasses, her eyes scanning the highlighted paragraphs of the venue contract. She didn't look up for 5 minutes. The only sound was the turning of pages and the hum of the HVAC system. Finally, she stopped on page 22, her finger tracing a line of text. "You really locked this down," she said, her voice filled with professional admiration. "I haven't seen a vendor agreement this tight since the tech bubble." "I don't plan parties, Sarah," I said, leaning forward. "I manage risk." "What does it say about the liquor license?" She tapped the paper. "It says that the venue's ability to serve alcohol is contingent upon the presence of the bonded site director listed on the permit. That's you. It explicitly states that because the venue is a historic vineyard with specific zoning restrictions, the liability insurance is void if a licensed professional isn't physically on site to oversee consumption. And the catering. Same deal," she said, flipping to the next tab. "The health permit is tied to your certification. Without you, the kitchen is legally just a room with a stove. They can't serve hot food. They can't pop a cork. If they try, they lose their county rating." I sat back, letting the information settle. It was the kill switch. I had the power to turn the wedding of the century into a dry reception with cold appetizers and tap water. It was the nuclear option. Sarah took off her glasses and looked at me, her expression softening from lawyer to friend. "Okay, Ren. Legally, you hold all the cards. If you walk away, the event implodes. But I have to ask. Do you want to appoint a proxy? We could draft an emergency rider, transfer the authority to one of your deputies. You could save the day without actually being there. You could be the bigger person." I looked out the window at the San Francisco skyline. The old Wren, the good sister, would have done exactly that. She would have sent a proxy. She would have saved the wedding from the shadows, accepted the disrespect, and told herself that keeping the peace was worth the price of her dignity. But the old Wren didn't know her sister was telling the world she was a drug addict. "No proxy," I said. "No riders. No rescue mission." "You know she's going to lose her mind," Sarah warned. "She won't just be sad. She'll be vicious." "I'm counting on it," I replied. "There's a concept in psychology called narcissistic injury. It happens when a narcissist's false self, the perfect image they project to the world, is challenged or threatened. Normal people feel guilt when they hurt someone. Narcissists don't feel guilt. They feel rage. They feel victimized because the world isn't following their script." I turned back to Sarah. "Alexis isn't going to look at a cancelled bar and think, 'Oh no, I shouldn't have treated my sister like trash.' She's going to look at it and think I'm stealing her spotlight. She's going to explode because I'm proving that she isn't the main character of the universe. She needs that audience, Sarah. She needs the worship. Taking that away is the only consequence she will actually feel." The lie about rehab had clarified everything. Alexis was willing to burn my career to keep her hands clean. She wanted to play the victim. Fine. I would give her a reason to cry that was actually real. She wants a perfect wedding. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. She can have exactly the wedding she paid for. Which, according to these contracts, is nothing. Sarah closed the binder with a definitive snap. "Understood. I'll draft the withdrawal notices. We execute on your signal." "Execute," I said. "It's time to close the account." I didn't send the emails immediately. I scheduled them. There is a specific kind of cruelty in automation, a detached efficiency that felt appropriate for the occasion. It was exactly 1 week before the wedding. I sat in my home office with a cup of tea, watching the clock on my laptop screen tick toward 9 in the morning. In my outbox sat 4 identical messages. One to the venue ownership, one to the county health department, one to the catering firm, and one to the insurance underwriter. The subject line was boring. Notice of withdrawal of license holder. The body of the email was even drier. It simply stated that due to my exclusion from the event premises, I could no longer fulfill my legal obligations as the designated site director. Therefore, effective immediately, I was withdrawing my certification from the permit applications. I flagged the upcoming event as unsupervised and non-compliant. At 9 in the morning, the emails vanished from my outbox. The digital kill switch had been flipped. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:15, my phone began to buzz. It wasn't a call. It was a notification from the venue's automated security system, which I still had access to. Alert. Kitchen access codes revoked. Alert. Liquor cabinet biometric lock engaged. The venue manager, Mr. Harrison, moved fast. He wasn't going to risk his multimillion-dollar liquor license for a client who just lost their insurance. He locked it down. At 11:30, my phone rang. The screen flashed Alexis. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted her to sit in the panic for just a few seconds longer. I wanted her to feel the silence. Then I answered. I didn't say hello. I just pressed accept. What did you do? It wasn't a question. It was a shriek. I could hear the echo of the venue's high ceilings in the background, and the frantic murmur of confusion. They put chains on the refrigerators, Ren. Chains. The manager just walked in here and told the caterers to stop prepping. He said the kitchen is a liability zone. He said we can't serve wine. He said we can't even serve water. I know, I said, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with her hysteria. I received the notification. Fix it. He screamed. Call him right now and tell him it's a mistake. People are flying in tomorrow. You are ruining my life. There was no remorse in her voice. No, I'm sorry I lied about you. Just the pure, white-hot rage of a narcissist who has been told no. She wasn't upset that she had hurt me. She was furious that I had the audacity to have leverage. Then there was a shuffling sound, and my father's voice boomed through the speaker. He was breathless, probably from shouting at the staff. Ren, this is enough, he barked. You've made your point. You're embarrassed, we get it. But this is your sister's wedding. You will call Mr. Harrison immediately, reinstate your license, and get this kitchen unlocked. Do you hear me? You will fix this mess. I leaned back in my chair, looking at the ceiling. They still thought this was a negotiation. They still thought they could bully the infrastructure into working for them. Can't, Dad, I said. What do you mean you can't? Course you can. No, I said, letting the word hang there. Can't hold a site license. I'm a liability. Alexis told everyone, remember? She told the groom's family. She told the investors. She told the world that I'm in rehab, that I'm unstable. The silence on the other end was absolute. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. A person in rehab can't insure a commercial event, I continued, my voice soft but lethal. If I came down there, I'd be committing fraud. You wouldn't want me to break the law, would you? I'm just doing exactly what Alexis said. I'm stepping back to focus on my recovery. Ren, please, my mother's voice cracked in the background. Don't do this. I didn't do it, I said. You did. You wanted me gone. I'm gone. I ended the call. Then I turned my phone off. The silence in my apartment was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was the sound of a closed account. By the time my flight touched down in Maui, the wedding of the century had officially dissolved into a dry, catered-by vending machine disaster. I didn't need to see the photos to know what it looked like. I knew the logistics. I knew that without a liquor license, the bar was just a piece of furniture. I knew that without a health permit, the 5-course meal was legally toxic waste. I knew that Alexis was currently screaming at a venue manager who was simply following the law I had enforced. But their chaos was no longer my project to manage. I had a summit to attend. I walked into the conference center the next morning wearing the suit I had bought with my bonus. I didn't look like a rejected sister. I looked like a shark. The Global Hospitality Summit is where the industry titans come to hunt, and I was ready. I didn't waste time networking at the buffet. I set up a meeting with the VP of Operations for a global hotel chain, a contact I'd been nurturing for months. I laid out my portfolio. I showed him the numbers. I showed him how I managed risk in high-compliance environments. I didn't mention the wedding, but the steel in my spine came from there. I negotiated with the kind of ruthless clarity you can only get after you've burned your bridges. By 4 p.m. I had a signed contract. It was a senior logistics role overseeing their Pacific division. The salary was double what I was making. The relocation package included housing. It was the kind of win that usually makes you want to call your mom. Pulled out my phone. There were 42 new voicemails. My mother crying. My father threatening. Alexis blaming me for the fact that her guests had left early to find a restaurant that served wine. I didn't listen to them. Instead, I went back to the airport lounge, the same setting where this story began, but the person sitting in the chair was different. There is a pervasive lie we tell ourselves about family. We are taught that family is a limb, a part of our body that we must keep attached at all costs, even if it's withering, even if it's poisoning the rest of us. We are told that cutting it off is an act of violence. But sometimes, amputation is the only way to save the patient. I looked at the notifications one last time. For years, I had believed that walking away would kill me. I thought the silence would be unbearable. But as I sat there, watching the planes taxi on the runway, I realized that the silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of peace. It was full of the energy I used to waste trying to buy their love. I didn't hate them. Hate takes too much effort. I just accepted that they were a bad investment. They required equity I didn't have, for a return I would never see. I opened my contacts. I selected Mom. Block. I selected Dad. Block. I selected Alexis. Block. I put the phone down and picked up my coffee. The sun was setting over the ocean, painting the sky in colors that didn't require a filter. I was alone, thousands of miles from home, with no return ticket and no family to go back to. And for the first time in my entire life I was free. We all reach a point where we have to choose between being a good family member and being a person with dignity. If you've ever had to fire your own family to save your sanity, share your story in the comments. I read every single one.